very much. Today, I want to tell you a story of two firms. These might sound a little familiar. The first firm, here we are. Email comes in on a Tuesday. One of the firm's best associates has just given notice. Now, you know what happens next. The managing partner called the firm administrator in a panic. They needed someone right away. They had active matters that were going to need coverage, and they couldn't wait. So they do what firms do when they're desperate. They called everyone they knew, they posted the opening, and they took the first 3 resumes that looked somewhat reasonable and scheduled lunches. The hiring process, such as it was, lasted all of 11 days. Now, the partners who interviewed at lunch, they didn't have a rubric. Nobody sat down and actually had a conversation about what the role required, what kind of work the person would be doing, what kind of pressure they would face, and what kind of person really thrives at this firm and in this environment. Nobody asked those questions because there wasn't time. And frankly, nobody had ever asked those questions even when there was time. After the lunch, one of the partners, who's a great guy, he gave his read, and he said, "Hey, this guy we just interviewed, Marcus, he seems smart, sharp. I could see myself having a beer with him at the end of the day. So I think he'd be a great fit." That was the review. That was the process. The next day, they made Marcus an offer, and he accepted. Now, 6 months later, Marcus is still there, and, he shows up on time. He's perfectly pleasant in the hallways. But if we're being really honest, his work is average at best. It's just not great. And so now the partners, they don't really trust him when matters come in. And so they've stopped giving him as much work. Sorry, if you're hearing my dog, 2 people just showed up to my door, of course, for no reason, to sell me something. But back to Marcus, because now lawyers aren't giving him any work. And as a result, it's all going to the A player on the team because that's who they trust. And that means Marcus's billables are starting to suffer. So now he's not making his hours, right? He's not doing anything wrong. He's just not doing anything great. And now the firm is paying the price in time and productivity. That invisible tax that we've all seen of the not quite right hires that they put on everybody around them. All right. Now let's shift gears down the street to our second firm. Now this firm, their best paralegal, Jordan, has just sent the firm administrator a calendar invite. The subject line, quick chat. No other context. The administrator knew what was coming the second she saw it, right? And sounding familiar to anyone? Jordan had been with the firm for 3 years. She was a top performer. Everyone loved her. They trusted her. When they needed something done, they called Jordan. But when the meeting happened, she gave her notice. Now, again, partners are panicking. What are we going to do? So they come back with a counteroffer. They offer a 15% raise, which should tell you something about how much they valued Jordan. But she turned it down. So now the administrator's having their exit interview, and she finally got up the courage to ask the question that she'd wanted to ask, which was this: Jordan, what would have actually kept you here? And Jordan looked at the table for a second, and then she said, "Well, I wanted to know where I was going. I've been here for 3 years, and I still don't know how people see me, if I'm really good at my job. I really wanted someone to invest in me, not because I was leaving, but before I was leaving. I wanted to know that I mattered here, not just performed here." The administrator thought about it and realized that the worst part wasn't just losing Jordan. The worst part was realizing that Jordan had been waiting to have that conversation now for 3 years, and they had never had it. 2 firms, 2 completely different problems, One hired without intention, under pressure, without a process, optimizing for who felt comfortable over who they would actually have thrive in the role. And they got Marcus, who was pleasant and present and, perfectly parked just below where the firm needed him to be. The other firm, they led without intention, right? They valued their best person and they really did intend to invest in her, but they just never quite got around to having those conversations that she'd been waiting to have. So different mistakes, but same outcome. A team that's not what it could be, and leaders who can't quite figure out why. So here's what I want you to understand before we go any further today. The talent crisis in legal, it isn't actually one problem, it's two. Well, two that we can sum up. And most firms might be trying to only solve part of it, and maybe even the wrong one. They're focused on finding people, but what they actually need is a system for finding those right people. And then they need a completely different system for making sure that those people stay, grow, and eventually lead. So today we're going to focus on both parts of those systems. So let's go back to Marcus for a minute. Because remember that Marcus, there was an 11-day hiring process. And that really was the problem, right? The partner who used lunch as an interview and didn't really know what to interview for, he was part of that problem. The firm had no idea what they were actually trying to hire for. They were just hoping for somebody that could breathe and do some work. And that's a problem. So Marcus, he did what he was capable of, but the firm just never figured that out before they made him that offer. And we know that this happens all the time, right? Not because firms intend to be careless, but because they're desperate. And they're desperate people, they take shortcuts. And sometimes when we take those shortcuts, we see the same results in our hiring, which is good enough. And we need somebody. So we say, this person seems fine. They'll probably work out. Let's move on it. And today I want to challenge that instinct directly because hiring someone who's good enough, it doesn't get you to great. It gets you to a team that's perpetually fine. And fine is expensive, right? In productivity, in that invisible tax that happens on our A players who carry the weight, because we know this happens all the time. When you have those mediocre team players, it's our A players who sort of get dumped on, and then they quietly resent us. And, it just creates a whole big mess everywhere we go. So if we want an amazing firm, we have to be willing to hire amazing people. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So today I want to give you 3 things that I think can help you drastically change your hiring process and your system so that you're hiring intentionally and hiring the right people. So first up, the first is we want to get clear on what we're actually hiring for. Not just the job description, but what does that role really require? What skills do they need for sure? I think most of us are focused on that, but we need to go beyond that. What's the working style for this particular department? What's the pace? What's the pressure tolerance? What values have to be present for someone to thrive here? I think most firms probably skip this step entirely. If you do have firm values, core values, are you using them in your hiring process? Or are they just fancy words that sit on your website or maybe even in a framed picture somewhere in the hallway? Or are we actually using those to define that these are the kind of people that work really well here and that we're going to use throughout our whole process, not just to hire, but then to evaluate and potentially even, have those harder conversations if people aren't living up to those values. I once, realized like our team, we are very systems heavy. We have a system for everything and we want people working inside of our systems. We also are all about driving change. We feel like we need to be leading the change and for our clients and for ourselves. And I had a team member come to me once and she just thought, honestly, she thought working with us was chaotic because what we saw as being innovative and improving and always looking for the best tech and always trying new things and always focused each quarter on what we were going to drive and what we were going to change. For her, that was an innovation. That was like disruptive. Like she just wanted, she said to me, can I just come into work and do the same thing every day and not have my job change for a while? And that's when I realized like she's a great person. She's just not the right person for our team. And so, really digging in on the front end and being really honest about what kind of person is going to succeed here is really going to help us. So now I can have those conversations when I'm interviewing people and I can say, listen, I'm going to be really straight with you. If you don't like change, if you don't like trying out the new tech tools and figuring out what, works and realizing just might, when you get comfortable with something, we might realize there's something better, you are going to hate working with us. And that's okay. I'd rather have that conversation in the interview process, than after we've invested all this time in bringing the person on. So we want to get clear up front and we want to make sure we're hiring for both. Next up, number 2, we want to use our job postings differently. It's not sufficient, in my opinion, to simply go on to whatever job posting site you see or take out here's the paralegal job posting or the associate job posting we've used for the last however many years, copy and paste and put it up again. These things are terrible. I hate reading them. In fact, one of my favorite things to do is to work with a firm on building a job ad that works. And notice I use the word ad on purpose, because this is a piece of marketing collateral. This is your chance to advertise to everyone out in the world to find that one person that's going to be amazing for your team. And so you need to treat it that way. You need to, first of all, recognize that your buyer in this situation is that potential candidate. And so you need to talk directly to them and attract them. Why should they consider joining your team? Maybe they're very happy at their job right now, but there's something that's missing that they'd be willing to jump for. Well, maybe you have the answer to that. So you want to spell that out and say, hey, if you're looking for this, here is your amazing place to work. We're for you, right? You don't want just the same old postings with generic language, same format, same boilerplate qualifications. We know you need to have attention to detail. Is there a way we could say that that's more interesting? We want people, I've had people say to me that they've read job descriptions that I've written and found themselves just doing this the entire time. I've had people say, I wasn't even looking for a job. I don't know why, but I read this job description, this job ad, and I thought, I have to come talk to these people because they're doing something different. And isn't that the people that we want to attract and have apply for our jobs? So we got to be clear again about who we are and who's going to be great in this role. I worked with a high-end family law firm in Atlanta, and they said to me before we wrote their job ad, they said, we just want to be straight with you, Stephanie. Like, we have some pretty risque fact patterns that come through with some of these divorces. So, we don't need anyone that's a wallflower and is going to be embarrassed to read some of the things happening in our cases. And you also need to know that we curse like sailors here. Like, everybody says the F word like every other sentence. And we're in the South. And so that may not be appropriate for some people. So guess what we put in our job ad? We said those things. I think I actually wrote like, be prepared that the office curses like sailors and drops the F-bomb every other sentence. The person that we ended up hiring in their cover letter back to us, or actually I had them write answers to some specific questions. The first words in the cover letter were, I found my effing people, right? I mean, isn't that what we wanted? It sounds so silly. And I know you're sitting there thinking, I would never say that. And I'm not asking you to if that's not your culture. But for these folks, it really mattered. And so now not only does the ad become just that, and we're attracting the right people, it becomes our filter because we're hiding those little Easter eggs in there and saying, hey, if people are really paying attention, then when they tell us what's exciting to them about working with us, they should be feeding that back to us. And that gives us a clue now that in our screening process, wow, this person's really interested. I did a similar thing with a firm. They have, it's a small firm, and the people bring their dogs like every day. When you go to their office, it's a little chaotic because there's usually 3 to 5 dogs running around. So, guess what we put in the job ad? Must love dogs. The new receptionist that they ended up hiring worked for a dog rescue on the weekends. So again, like, because her application stood out because she led with that. She was like, "No, this would be an amazing place for me to work. I would love to have dogs in the office every day." So whatever it is, we want to be specific. We want to be honest, talk about our values, not in abstract terms, but really concrete ones. What does it mean to work here? What do we expect from people, and what should they expect from you? All right, third, moving on. We have to teach our people how to interview. I am a lawyer, so you know, uh, that presentation earlier hit home a couple of places, but I've been in law firms. I've seen those lawyers, so that's not me. I would like to think I'm not that person. But I also can, I'm part of the club, so I can say where lawyers suck. And one of it is hiring. Nobody ever taught me how to interview. I got to my firm and I remembered they sent me and they're like, okay, Stephanie, we need someone to go do summer associate interviews. And they sent me off to UVA and Emory and a few other law schools. And they literally said, just find someone that you like, probably someone you want to hang out with and have a drink with at the end of the day. That is where that story comes from, because that's what I was told to do. And guess what? Finding my next drinking buddy actually isn't the goal of a job interview, because maybe my next drinking buddy isn't the best fit for our firm and isn't, the person who's going to excel in what we do and how we do it, right? That tells us nothing about whether they're going to be successful with us. So the question that we're trying to answer in an interview isn't necessarily, do I like this person? It's, can this person do the job the way we do it here? And that requires a different kind of questioning and a different set of skills to show up in our interviews. So I'm a big fan of behavioral interviewing, where we ask candidates to describe specific situations from their past rather than hypothetical future ones. I taught my husband this skill when he was interviewing for a delivery driver. I gave him my list of questions, and at first, him and his manager looked at me kind of skeptical, like, "You really want us to ask these things?" And I said, "Look, just give it a try and see how it goes." So they asked the college graduate who was coming to apply for the job. He had had an internship, and one of the questions was, tell me about a time the day ended, but there was still work to be done. And the guy thought about it for a second and he said, I was at my internship and our boss called us all out and said, all hands on deck. I know it's 5 o'clock, but we got to get this thing done. We need everyone to stay. And my husband's like, cool. What happened next? And he said, well, after about 20 minutes, I was bored, so I bounced. Now, my husband and I feel old because we had a good laugh about the fact that this guy said he bounced in an interview, because we were like, okay, clearly not how we would talk, but he told the truth, right? Like, when you ask those behavioral interview questions, people show up differently and they tend to say very honest things. But our lawyers have never been taught to use these skills in an interview session, right? They just, again, are like, and they also are asking the same questions, the same boring questions, tell me about yourself. Yeah, we could do better, but we can't do better unless we train our people how to do better. So it's not going to be sufficient just to say, guys, do better. We need to give the attorneys, whoever it is, the administrators, the folks in our firms who are doing the interviews, we need to give them the skills, the training, the sample questions, and practice with them. Because I've done this training for lawyers, and sometimes they look back a little bit at me, and I'm like, trust me, this works. Let's practice. Let's dig in, and then they find results. So don't let them just go off on their merry way. All right, one more thing when it comes to hiring, and that's this, right? Hiring doesn't end with the offer. The onboarding process is not just showing someone to their desk and assigning them work. It's the beginning of the relationship that we're trying to build. And we know studies say that it could take a full year for a new team member to feel fully up to speed and genuinely connected to the team. So we want to design an onboarding experience that validates their decision to join your team. Make sure they understand the firm's history, their vision and the values. By the way, everyone at the team, I don't care what position they're in, everyone should understand who we help and how we help them. They should be ready to answer that question the next time, because they're going to get that asked a lot when talk about marketing from the last session, right? Everyone down to whoever answers the phones should have a clear understanding and be able to just quickly say who we help and how we help them instead of just saying, I work at a law firm, because that is, that's part of your marketing messaging right there. So we want to make sure that our folks understand not just their job, but also what's happening at the firm as a whole, our history, and then also get introduced to the team and start to build those relationships that we know are so important. All right, so now, well, let's shift a little bit from hiring to leading. So let's say now you've put all these pieces in place at play in your firm and you've hired the right person. You were intentional about the role. You posted a great advertisement. You learned how to interview and you onboarded them well. You did everything right. But then what? Because for a lot of firms, the answer is our Jordan situation, right? We hand them off to a leader who was never taught what to do next. They're not a bad person. They care. They just probably were somebody who was promoted because they were excellent at their work. And so what do we do with those folks? We hand them a team and then we leave them to figure out the people part on their own. So someone who's really trying to operate on instinct because nobody's ever told them a framework for how to actually lead people. And that's where we get with the Jordan situation. She was the right hire. She was smart and trusted and high performing from day one. The firm didn't make a hiring mistake with her. I'd argue they made a leadership development mistake because they put an exceptional person in front of an undeveloped leader and assumed the rest would just kind of take care of itself. You've probably heard the phrase, people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad bosses. Well, I think there's some truth in that, right? But I also think it's an incomplete statement because in my experience, most of the leaders, they're not bad bosses, they're undeveloped bosses. And I think there's a difference. And I think that difference matters enormously for what you're going to do about it. Because, Jordan's boss, she wasn't a bad person. She really did care about Jordan and she was sad to see her go. She just never was taught how to be a great leader and how to develop Jordan and answer what Jordan needed in order to be happy with her job. Nobody gave her those tools. But the good news is that all those tools are teachable, and you can learn them, right? It's not a personality issue necessarily. It's about learning a framework for how to lead and manage people better. And actually, I'm pretty excited. I'm going to go ahead and announce this now because it didn't get into the new bio. But Debbie Foster, who will be talking here with you guys in a few seconds, we have just co-authored a book that's going to be published soon. So you're hearing this first, and saying it out loud to other people outside of our team means that it really has to happen. But we're very close to publishing a new book on leadership for legal that's going to have this whole framework built out in it. So I'm pretty excited to kind of give you guys a sneak peek for that today. So here you go. Number one, I'm going to give you 5 tools today that we can use to develop our leaders better so that we're taking care of those great hires better and retaining them. And so the first one is we got to know our people, right? Not just like how they do their work, but we need to know them personally. And I think we need to know their work ambitions. So think about your leaders right now at your firm. If we were to go to them and say, where does each person on your team want to be in 3 years? Not what they're working on right now, not if they're hitting their numbers, but where do they want to go? Where do they want to go with their careers? What kind of work gets them energized? And what kind of work quietly drains them? Would we have answers to that? Would our leaders be able to answer that? Because you can't develop people that you don't know. Now, you don't have to be their best friend, but you do need to have some conversationals with them, real intentional ones, and not just performance reviews, but sit down with each person on your team and ask, what do you want to be doing more of? Where do you want to be in 2 or 3 years? And shockingly, sometimes I even ask people, and it doesn't mean that you have to be working here. What if what if their next move is to move on from you and I can help them get there? Boy, do they come a referral source for life. They're like, wow, that's amazing. No boss has ever said that to me before. Like, let's just be honest. Not everyone is a lifer and stays with us forever. So, what if we had some honest conversations and worked with them? It made it valuable, the experience they had while they were working with us. So, ask our folks, what kind of work lights you up and what doesn't? Not that you always won't be able to give them that work, but at least you'll know and you can, layer in maybe some of that work that really excites them. Maybe there's some stretch work that they want to get that they haven't tried before, but you could give it to them and say, yeah, let me try to help you develop this skill and I'm going to support you along the way. So here's the important part. Once we have these conversations, we have to do something with it, right? Not just wait, not just say, oh, that's great to know, but really try to respond to those people and make sure that you're acknowledging it and trying to change a piece of their work so they can feel that goal of theirs is being achieved. All right, number 2, we need to set clear expectations because they can't grow toward a target that they can't see. And one of the most consistent things we see when we're working inside law firms is that people are being evaluated against standards that were never clearly given. And so they're doing their best or they're doing what they think they need to do. And we need to be clear as leaders about what those standards are. Too many hires, or maybe even not so new hires, they feel lost. They're a little unsure of what's actually expected of them. And therefore, they don't know when they're falling short. I'm sure that nobody sat down with Marcus and said, Marcus, this is the bar and you're here. That's a hard conversation to have, but it's one that we avoid often. And the reason we avoid it so much is because we haven't set those standards from the beginning. So then when we know people aren't meeting them, we feel guilty because we think, gosh, I just never told them. And so maybe they didn't know this is what was expected of them. Clear expectations aren't micromanagement. They're respect. They're saying, hey, here's what success looks like in this role. Here's how we do things at this firm. Here's the standard I'm going to hold you to, and I'm going to hold everyone else to it equally. And by the way, that last part matters more than we realize because our high performers are watching us and they're watching to see if that standard applies to everyone. Because when it doesn't, when they do see that that colleague gets to slide by with lower expectations and nobody says anything, yeah, they're just annoyed, right? And they're quietly assessing, like, is this a place worth staying? So setting clear expectations and holding those standards is one of the most underrated retention tools that you have, and you need to be using it. All right, our third point is connecting people's work to something larger. A whole bunch of studies show us that meaning matters, right? People want to know that they matter and they want to know that their work matters. And this is where, especially ambitious people, they really want to know, that their work is more than a task list. They want to know how their work connects to something bigger. They want to know if the firm's going somewhere, if their contribution's part of a larger story. And guess what? For law firms, this is so easy for us because we're the helpers of the world, right? That's what we all by nature we do. We help people. But everyone in your organization, again, down to the person who answers the phones, needs to know that, hey, you may feel like you're answering the phones, but in reality, you're helping that person fill in the blank, whatever it is, however it is you help your clients. They need to understand that their daily work connects back to this larger purpose and as a result is making a difference in the world. That matters to people. And so it doesn't require a speech, but it does require leaders who make it a habit, right? In ordinary conversations to connect those dots between the work and the why. And so when you're assigning something, say why it matters. When a client outcome is good, name the specific contribution that made that possible. And when the firm's making decisions about the future, make sure you're bringing your people into it enough so that they can see where things are going. Because your people are always asking, whether they're saying it out loud or not, does my work here matter? Am I more than my output? And your leaders are the ones that need to answer that every day. All right. Next, we're going to develop our people, not just give them work. And I kind of touched on this already, but I want to go deeper for a second because this, I think, is a place where there is a gap that we see a lot in law firms about what people think they're doing and what they actually experience. And I get it because I have been guilty of this myself. We want to delegate to the person who can get it done fast and the best. It's efficient. It keeps things moving. It's easier, right? Like I don't want to have to, I know if I give it to my A player, they're just going to knock it out of the park. But it has a compounding cost that most firms don't see until they're already in crisis. Because over time, your best person gets everything that's important and they become overloaded. And then other people on the team, they're underutilized and they're not gaining the skills they need. And then, when your best person leaves, you're now really stuck because now these people aren't ready to fill that gap. And these people are leaving because they're like so overloaded. They're like, I talked to a woman at the gym yesterday. Her daughter's at a big firm downtown in Atlanta. And she told me that her daughter billed 2,600 hours a year last year. And you could bet that I started a conversation with that mom. I was like, all right, tell your daughter to call me because that is not sustainable, right? She's like, well, she's great at what she does. And I think the partners just keep giving her work and she doesn't know how to say no. She's not going to stand up for herself. So now that person is quietly going to start looking, our A players, because we're not using the opportunities to start developing our talent over here. And I get it, guys. That is hard to do because it's slower. It takes time. It means that I might have to give this work to this other person and I may have to spend time, managing them and coaching them and correcting them and getting it up to where we need it to be. And that does take more time today. But I promise you over the long haul, it matters. And it's a situation we want to avoid. All right. Wrapping up here because Alan's got us on a tight schedule, which brings me to point number 5 is the conversations that we're avoiding are the ones we need to have. So it's not enough to just give those people the work or to be frustrated with those people who aren't meeting the standards in the background, right? As leaders, we have to coach and give feedback consistently and constantly when something goes wrong. And so this is the practice that's going to make everything else compound and work together. And sadly, it's one that our leaders are least equipped to do, right? We hear it all the time. Feedback in law firms, it's either too vague to be useful or too late to matter. Good job doesn't really tell anybody anything. Same with, this needs work. Feedback that would actually help is specific. It's timely. It's delivered with enough directness that the person knows exactly what to change. And so let me give everybody a framework that we teach that's super easy to use when we're giving feedback. This works, by the way, for positive and negative feedback, and we want to make sure we're using it in a positive way too. So it's OIR. The O is for observation. You want to start with what you actually saw or heard. Facts, not interpretations, right? If somebody was watching this with a videotape, what would they see? Hey, Sally, you interrupted the client 3 times today in our client intake meeting. That is an observable fact. If you lead with intention, you set yourself up for failure right away. Hey, Sally, I feel like you're not listening. Well, what are they going to say? Yes, I was. I feel like you don't care. Yes, I do. Right? Like that's not a productive conversation. Sally, you interrupted the client 3 times today. She can't really push back on that. It's fact. The impact is simply then, what was the impact as a result? As a result, the client shut down and they stopped giving us information we need. And then the R request or results, what do you want to see differently? And so remember, this cuts both ways, positive and feedback. The other thing we want to mention here is we want to avoid that kindness trap. Sometimes we think we're avoiding those hard conversations because we care about the people, and that's it. That isn't the right way to go, right? When we avoid telling someone they're falling short, then we're not we're not actually caring about them. Kindness, clarity is kindness. That's what I'm trying to say. And you lose credibility quietly when you don't hold those standards for your team. So we want to have those hard conversations because they're an act of care. And the leaders who understand that are the ones whose entire teams will stay. So let's bring it all together, because the premise of my conversation today was that if you do these 5 practices together, remember, none of them are super complicated. They're all learnable. And when you do that, when you know your people, you set clear expectations, you connect their work to purpose, you develop them, and then you coach and give feedback, not just when something breaks, but when they do great work as well. That's when you start seeing team members who want to stay. And so the great firms that are going to win the talent game, it's not just about compensation. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you money doesn't matter, because it does, right? It's a threshold, but it's not a differentiator. Once you're in the market and you're competitive, throwing more money at the problem doesn't solve it. And I think Jordan's example proves that with that exit interview, right? What separates the firms that build unstoppable teams is intention. Intentional systems for finding those right people, and then intentional investment in the leaders those people report to so that they are developed and nurtured and want to stay on your team. Those two systems work together, and that becomes your talent pipeline. So neither one is enough without the other. You can hire brilliantly and then lose your best people to a leader who never learned how to develop them. Or you could develop exceptional leaders and watch them struggle because the team around them was built on compromised hiring decisions. So we want to be intentional and have both systems working together. All right. And with that, I'm right at my time. So let's check in on any questions before we wrap up and get to Michael.
Everything you said. I do have a question, Stephanie. I do have a question. And I know that I get this all over the country. Every time, I'm traveling all over the country, as everyone knows, and, oh, Ellen's there this week. But this is what I get when I'm in firms. What would you recommend? Because look, there are recruiters, there are so many recruiters and great recruiters out on LinkedIn, right? There's good recruiting companies, but the big subject right now is recruiting. It's recruitment. There's no getting around it. That is what everyone, it is absolutely what everyone is talking about. The question is what would you recommend for recruiting? What program or what system would you recommend for today for recruiting talent for a firm?
I would point you to a couple of resources. I don't have like a company, but although we do help with that sometimes. Joey Coleman wrote a good book, Never Lose an Employee Again. I'm looking over there because it's on my bookshelf. He's also been on my podcast. And I think he kind of speaks to some of the things I was talking about. Like, recruiting starts with having a great team, right? It's much easier to recruit if we have a great place to come and work. And so it's not just about what we do in that recruiting process. It's why do they want to come work with us? And so sometimes it's really starts with the hard work that we have to do to build a better business. And if we're not there yet, at least be honest about where you are and where you are hoping to get with your team member. I'd rather that than you just kind of lie to me and sugarcoat it, and then I get into the firm and I'm like, what's going on here? I was just sold a bill of goods. So if you are struggling, or if you are having, you're going to change some things as a recruit, I would want to know that in the process. Oh, for the person who asked, I host the Lawyerist podcast. I'll put it in here. And yeah, thank you, Debbie. And Debbie, would you say something different? I don't know. You might have a different answer.
The only thing that I would say is personal relationships often bring in the best talent. So who did your associates go to law school with? And if they're happy and they love where they work, it's a whole lot easier to ask them to go out and talk to their friends, talk to their classmates about your firm. So we get asked this question a lot too with laterals. Where can I go to figure out what laterals are available? And I'm like, a bar association function around a dinner table. Like, who do you respect when you find out they're on the other side? Or what, think about the relationships that you have and where those synergies are. And I think that we don't, I think you were with me, Stephanie, or someone was with me, and I said, have you ever considered giving your associates a bonus for referring someone in? And they looked at me like I had three heads. I said, do you pay recruiters? And they said, yes. And I said, then why wouldn't you pay $5,000 to one of your team members, right? Like, how do we really think about socializing what it means to work at our firms and continue to work on creating a great place to work?